Coming to you from the dining room table at East Barbary Lane, welcome to a special episode of Full Circle, the podcast. I am your host, Charles Tyson Jr., and I am delighted to be sitting down with our guest today. He is a wonderful author of science fiction in the young adult milieu, as it were, and his new book is delightful. It is called The Brightness Between Us, and it is a sequel to what I feel is going to be an ongoing saga. Eliot Schrefer is in the building. Hi, Eliot. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being had by us.
That's a sophisticated set of grammar right there. Nailed it.
So yes, so your new baby is entitled The Brightness Between Us, and it is a sequel. But first, why don't you tell us what's in store for us in the story overall and in this particular installment?
Yeah, so The Darkness Outside Us is a science fiction novel I wrote back in 2021. It is a romantic gay science fiction story about it takes place 400 years in the future, and the first astronaut to settle a moon outside of Saturn has gone missing. Her distress beacon went off, and then no one has heard from her. And so the two remaining countries on Earth scramble a rescue mission to go rescue her, and they have to put one astronaut from each of these warring countries on board. So these two boys are enemies of each other, sworn enemies of each other, but ultimately have to work together to do this rescue mission. But as they approach the moon of Saturn, they discover that the ship has been lying to them and that their mission is not at all what they were told, and that it's actually something much different. And so by the end of the book, these two boys have traveled across the Milky Way to settle a new planet, and they are the future of humanity because war has destroyed Earth. And at the end of the first novel, they settle on this planet and begin a new life, begin a new civilization. So it's kind of like a literal version of it's Adam and Steve, not Adam and Eve. And then the Brightness Between Us picks up 16 years in the future, and they are now 30-something dads, these two boys, and they have two 16-year-old kids, Owl and Yarrow, and they're trying to scramble together a life on this distant planet. But there's more than we haven't met any aliens or other creatures around, but there's plenty to be discovered on the other side of the mountains around their settlement about what's actually going on this planet.
I love it. Yeah, the book has a constant sense of wonder and discovery about it, and it's very cool. I dig it. One of the things that warmed my heart, I just love how the kids referred to their parents as dad and father. I was like, it's a nice way to navigate that.
Yeah, originally I had them using their parents' first names because they're point of view characters, and they kept calling them Kodiak and Ambrose, and it just felt weird, just like when kids first name their parents, like it can sort of startle you at first. Right. But yeah.
Okay. What drew you to science fiction? Have you always been a fan?
I've been a fan of science fiction, yes. When I was a teenager, I loved 2001 and its follow-up novels. I am a huge fan of Battlestar Galactica, the reboot that started in 2004.
Same.
And I think, there's just something, science fiction does this crazy thing, which it takes things that we're concerned about, like social questions that we have about how we relate to each other in our contemporary world. And it puts them in a new context where you can kind of see them anew and reassess it. And I think that's always been a really powerful selling point of that genre. Just like how Star Trek back in the 1960s was a way to talk about race for a country that was unwilling to talk about race. They were doing it through this diverse crew that was meeting, like Captain Kirk kept falling in love with various aliens, Right. And so it was like, the first interracial kiss was on Star Trek. And I think there's a way in which it kind of can push forward and in a way that contemporary narratives not necessarily aren't necessarily equipped to do can actually look and really examine what's going on. And I think for me, reading these science fiction stories, I never even hoped to find an LGBTQ character in them.
Right.
And that felt like a real kind of loss. Like I would have loved to see myself in one of these stories. And so in The Darkness Outside Us and The Brightness Between Us, it's very much trying to like fill a hole that was there, not just around LGBT representation, but also, sci-fi kind of deservedly gets a reputation sometimes as being a little bit chilly. Like it's kind of all about the ideas and not about characters and feeling. And I wanted to kind of also, as much as I could, like just create characters and a romance that would really pull people in. And so there's a way in which these boys are the only other humans in each other's lives because they're trapped on a spaceship together. And so there's a way in which they discover that connection is the only way to survive. And I think we all live a version of that story where you realize even with all your armor and you're saying like, I'm good, I'm fine on my own, I don't need anyone, right. Screw my family, screw my friends, whatever. Like we all learn like you do need someone. It doesn't have to be your family that you were born with, but you do. We only exist in emotionally healthy ways if we're in a relationship with someone of any sort, not just romantic.
Yeah, that is one thing that, I also am a fan of science fiction, and you're right. It does tend to be a little cold and clinical and sterile at times. And that is an element in your work that I do appreciate, that sense of emotional awareness and intimacy. And, I think it is safe to say that comes directly from, our queer sensibility and the longing for connection and belonging and togetherness and family, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And we have to work, we all had to survive an upbringing where we weren't necessarily able to be our authentic selves, or right. Most of us did. So a lot of our adulthood is about, keeping whatever armor is useful, but also removing whatever pieces we can to become vulnerable to each other and not always, because I think, I certainly, if you look at like the wreckage of all my relationship from my 20s, I just was not ready to like sort of say like, ooh, I need you, I need help, like those kind of things. I was like, just always trying to like, no, I'm fine. Like you're emotional, but I'm not feeling anything right now. And that was all a result of growing up in the closet and feeling like I had to like be walled off from needing people, relying on them, or being my full self with them. And a lot of my work as an adult was figuring out how to become authentic again. Like I needed to do that early on in my life to survive, but I don't need to now. So it's very much something I wanted to talk about in the book too, is to like explore how we connect with other people. And it's like the hardest task of our lives, I think, to really get full connection. Like I think human relationships are simple on one end and really tricky when you look at it through another end. Like there's a lot you're always learning about how to be a good partner to right. whoever you're with.
And there's never just one answer, and that one answer doesn't always stay the same answer.
Yep, absolutely.
And, then there's also that whole like, feeling of where the importance of love is. And you talked about like, building the armor and breaking down the armor. And sometimes there's elements of like, well, if they love me, then what does that say about them? And
oh yeah, I had that relationship too. There's some quote, I think it was Woody Allen, that said, I don't want to be a part of any club that would have me as a member.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. And definitely, like some people, like if someone loves them, then there must be something wrong with them, right? So they find a way to talk themselves out of that relationship. And that's a really self-defeating mindset.
It is. And when you said relationships in the 20s, part of me just cringed because, some
dire ones.
The mistakes we made. It's a wonder I'm still here. But
when you don't even know what mistakes you're making, that's part of the problem. Like the ones you're conscious of, you're trying not to make, but you're making all the subconscious ones, So.
And how do we learn from our mistakes when we think we already know every damn thing?
Yep.
It's a wonder we make it out alive. Well, actually, we don't.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, and the Darkness Outside Us, I don't want to reveal the plot twist, but it has halfway through it has a major thing happens where the boys' mission is not their actual mission, and they end up kind of like in a situation where they can restart their relationship with each other after thousands of years go by. And so they leave messages to their future selves about how to be good partners for each other. And that was partly about, when you think about some of those people before I was equipped to be a good relationship partner, looking back, probably knowing what I knew now, that relationship could have worked out. I've been with my husband now for 15 years, so I'm not actively seeking any of that. But right. I think back on some of those, and like it was me. It wasn't him. It was me in some of those situations. And but the scar tissue's there. There's often you can return to a relationship, but sometimes the hurts go too deep, and you just can't. And I was kind of thinking about what if you could have a redo, and not to reveal too much, but the story of Darkness Outside is kind of exploring that. Let's give it a second go and see how we can be better.
Nice. And yeah, we're going to dig into that a little bit more in a moment. But yeah, I was just thinking there are a lot of stories that are quote unquote universal, but I'm sitting here thinking there's just some stories that can only be told from a queer sensibility and a queer point of view, because not everyone really has that shorthand and that approach to relationships and the emotional intelligence that can come through it. And it's interesting when other people try to tell our stories and it just doesn't feel right.
When I was thinking of the legacy of science fiction too, where you have these astronauts who don't have emotional needs, they are like our own space program. We just drafted our first astronauts were all Air Force pilots that were just swapped over to become astronauts instead. And really they were taught to be unemotional, to drive out emotional needs. And it was thought that that's what made the perfect astronaut. But now we have a very different approach to it. And you realize they're trapped in this environment in close quarters in high tension environments with other people. And having emotional intelligence is crucial. It's not that's something that we have to avoid emotions. Instead it's about being expressive and being in touch with what you're feeling and also what other people are feeling around you. And I think it's kind of time science fiction caught up to the fact that it's not like emotions are secondary to survival. They are crucial to surviving.
Right. Because otherwise, we could just have an entire story about robots.
Yeah. Or robotic people, which some of the sci-fi classics, they are they're characters, but they're not really they're just sort of automatons going through this storyline.
Exactly. So something very exciting. Your first book, The Darkness Outside Us, is in development to be a feature film.
Yeah.
That's one exciting thing. And the other exciting thing is it's in development with Elliot Page's production company, Pageboy Productions, which that's so many cool things wrapped them inside of each other.
Yeah, I was delighted when I got that call because, Pageboy Productions is doing really exciting stuff. They're looking to make commercial, broadly accessible movies that are from and about marginalized people, and getting as many people on the team who are, trans, gay, bi, and just really shaking up who's making movies and who movies are about. And so it's been really exciting to work with them. And then I can't go into the details because it hasn't been announced, but there is a major studio that stepped up in a big way to fund it. So it's, I sort of feel like Charlie Brown with the football around film stuff. I'm sure I'll run towards it and Lucy will find a way to pull the football away. But right now it looks really promising that we will actually have a movie of Darkness Outside Us sooner rather than later. So that would be super exciting.
I love that. Have you gotten a chance to have direct conversations with Eliot?
So I've been talking to the head of Pageboy Productions, Matt Jordan Smith, and he's been my main go-to. I'm going to be in LA next month, so it's possible that I'll be meeting with Eliot. But so far, we haven't had a chance to have a conversation. I'm not sure what a group of Elliots is called. It's probably some collective noun for it, but we do spell it differently. I'm one L and Eliot is two L's. So
in my head, it's Eliocean, but
Eliocean, I like it. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, I love that. I love that mission statement of the production company, and your work definitely fits right in there, especially in this time of. I get so tired of hearing people say, "Why do we need to care about the sexuality of the characters? Why do we need to know? Why do we need to care? Why does sexuality have to be put on display, as it were?" To which I usually then just post screenshots of their faves, kissing, like Batman and Catwoman and things like that. It's like, you're not thinking about it, but trust me, it's always there.
Yeah, like straight is a sexuality. It's not like that is
Thank you.
Like an empty space that isn't a sexuality. It is a different one.
I mean, judging from stories of a lot of women I know, maybe it is. But but no,
Fair.
that's wonderful. Talk to me. Yeah, talk to me about your feelings on that, because representation is crucial.
Yeah. Well, so I was, I don't love the phrase like the character just happens to be gay or bi or trans. I think it's not.
That's so dismissive.
No one just happens to be their sexuality, right? Like it influences who you are and how your life is. But at the same time, there's a place for books that are about being LGBTQ. But Darkness Outside Us and Brightness Between Us isn't about that as much as it's just part of these characters' lives and who they are. And I think we need both kinds of stories. One where it's about that identity, and another where that is less central. And actually, with the screenwriter for Darkness Outside Us, we did a co-project where we read this book on the making of 2001, sort of thinking about other sci-fi movies and what we could learn from it. And I was reading that book, and Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote the novel 2001, was gay and lived with a man in Sri Lanka.
I don't think I knew that.
I know, I didn't either until I read this. And I realized like the characters in 2001, two men on a voyage,
right?
And they're not really, one of them has a wife back home, but it's not really their sexuality isn't part of their characterization. And I see this kind of artful dodge that Arthur C. Clarke did in the 60s when he wrote 2001 to sort of neither make them gay, but also like not have their straight sexuality a big part of their characters. But as a result, it sort of feels like there's like a little missing piece somewhere in that story of this human connection. And so I would love to think of the sort of gay version of 2001. And in a way, Darkness Outside is kind of his, this fraught, tense experience of being locked into a spaceship. Like you can't leave, right? There is no, like, I'm out of here. We're done. Like you're like, then you're in the vacuum of space and it's not good for you. So they really have to figure out their relationship and their love. And I have the main characters, like one of them is very kind of progressive and really sort of comes from a country where they don't even use labels for people's sexuality or sexual identities. It's all just much more fluid. And the other one's from a much more repressive, patriarchal, old school society, and he's more buttoned down. And so just to give a sort of different ways of looking at how we approach our own sexualities through these two characters, to see, we all have varying relationships of comfort with our own who we are as people.
Yeah, and that's an interesting dichotomy with people, because we have those of us that are like, why do we need labels? Why do we need to make things a thing? Why can't we just be? And then other people are like, but if there's no order, then how do I know how to be?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When it's, I find I have both feelings at the same time, like I don't want to have to self-identify or to like think of a label for other people, but it's also a really quick shorthand that's useful in a lot of circumstances, to be able to say like, here's who I am. Like, here's my descriptors. It can catch people up really quickly, whereas it takes more work if you're going to avoid labels to really get across your identity.
Yeah, and now that I said that, I am thinking about like the new generation, and it does get a little chaotic. It's like, I have to learn a whole new language, and it's like, I am always going to be respectful of my people, but certain things like, do I really have to say Z and Zer? Can I just say your name?
Yeah, that one it's hard for just the brain to process it, but I do appreciate, the the ways in which sort of these very like specific identities like sort of allow people to quickly identify, even if their sexuality or their sexual identity is really complicated.
Right.
That I think it's useful, and it's good to have a broader set of terms, but it does mean, there will always be a term that I'm not familiar with, right? So I just hope for patience and grace from people that are teaching me about how they identify when I don't yet know what their adjectives mean.
Right. And then you have people that are like, my gender is a warm summer night. And it's like, no, we're not doing that. I'm sorry. Log off. But
well, I think there's like two sides of you want gender to be really like sort of taken seriously, and sometimes it can feel like it's being taken not seriously. But at the same time, like it's great to be playful around gender too, right? Like have like that we can have. It doesn't have to be a serious concept all the time, right? Like we can kind of screw it up and be fluid and genderqueer, and I think
definitely
should be room for all of it, hopefully. Yeah,
definitely. And of course, and to backtrack real quick, I was thinking about 2001 and the queer sensibility behind it that I didn't realize was there. Hal is kind of a shady queen.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. The all-seeing eye of Hal. Yeah.
Now that I think about it, yeah.
Yeah, and I rewatched it, and they're very handsome astronauts too on that voyage. Like, I mean, Kubrick, the director, wasn't gay from anything I can tell, or bi, but there definitely was an interest in casting very beautiful people for those roles.
Yeah, and 2001 is a visually striking world. Oh, anyway. Speaking of Hal, so AI is a very present component of your work in these stories. So how much of that concept do you put what you want to see, and how much like where we are? Because the whole concept of AI for me is very fraught.
Yeah, I think it is for a lot of us. Writing Darkness Outside Us, I wrote it in 2019, and at that time, AI was being mentioned, but I was a little leery of even saying the phrase artificial intelligence in the book, because I was worried it's going to be like a fad, that we wouldn't be talking about it. And then obviously now we're really talking about it a lot more. That was not a worry I needed to have. But I think at this point, because of our diet of other science fiction stories, we're very ready to have the kind of evil AI interpretation. And I definitely play with it in The Darkness Outside, as there's the ship's operating system, they call it OS, is shady. And their true mission is kept a secret from them by the ship. But once they know the true mission and they are heading off to settle this new planet, the AI becomes an ally. And it becomes, when they land, it becomes kind of the third parent for their kids. It's this like sort of gentle gardener of this new civilization. And I kind of liked playing with our expectations around it, that it doesn't have to be Skynet and Terminator, that there is a way in which AI might be, as it gets more and more complicated, might be emotionally complicated too, and capable of good things and bad things. And we kind of see that in our everyday. There's, a lot of us are worried about the influence it'll have on misinformation and, students plagiarizing essays from ChatGPT. But at the same time, it'd be hard to resist. But at the same time, you can see all the small ways in which it's facilitating everyday life in useful ways. So I think it can be both at the same time, right? And we have to kind of be able to hold both of those in our head. That it might be force of good and bad.
Exactly. And, I am all about the advancement of science and technology. In fact, I'm low-key obsessed with it. And, part of me is very excited with the way that AI is integrating itself into our real life. And then part of me is like, the people that are creating these things, I know they read the same books and saw the same movies that I did. So it's like, why are we trying to like do certain things to prove that we can, when we already have not good example of what could happen. It's like,
Yeah.
why are we doing this to ourselves? And why do we have that impulse to do that to ourselves?
Yeah. When it's this kind of mad scientist approach where because you can do it, you should do it,
Right.
which you trust that someone else will step in the way if it's going to do wrong, that it's not your responsibility as the creator of these things. And I think we're realizing that governments have been slow to get a handle on how to put guardrails on AI. And in a lot of ways, it might be too late.
Yeah, that's why whenever I ask Chat GPT to write something for me, I always make sure to say please and thank you.
Because you want to survive the robot apocalypse.
I'm one of the good ones, please. Thank you.
That's right. I was just learning today that people give names to their Roombas, and I've never named my robot vacuum. So I think I'm worried that I'll be killed during the robot uprising. So I'm gonna name it really quick so that it keeps me alive.
Right. Oh, now you have manners. Uh-huh.
Now that it's useful.
I love it. I love it. I love it. So what do you see the brightness between us being part 2 of an ongoing saga?
I think so. I'm a little leery around sequels in general because for every good sequel, there's probably 4 or 5 really terrible sequels out there. And I actually got in trouble yesterday for naming Grease 2 as a terrible sequel, which apparently a lot of people really love Grease 2.
That is so controversial.
It is apparently. But like, let's say Speed 2, right? So Speed was an amazing movie, and they were like, let's just make the bus a cruise ship and do it all over again. And it just didn't work. And I think when a sequel doesn't have its own thing it needs to say, when it's just like a follow-up without really a lot of thought behind it, it can be kind of terrible. So I dragged my feet about writing any follow-up to Darkness Outside Us until I realized I had more to say and a story that could stand on its own. And so that's when I wrote it. And so I think I'm interested. I think this world has more stories in it to tell that I would like to tell, but I'm waiting to find a storyline that can stand on its own and not just rely on the other two for a book 3. So if and hopefully when that comes to me, then yeah, I'll work on it. But I don't want to make a Speed 2 or a Grease 2. The model for me of like a perfect sequel is Aliens after
Yes.
because Alien had this amazing creature, an amazing lead with Sigourney Weaver, and it was basically a slasher movie just in a spaceship. Right?
Yep.
And then Aliens kept the main character, but the tone of the movie changed. It became more like a war movie instead of a slasher movie. It was like Platoon or something, but with the aliens. And I thought that was so clever because it was a follow-up. It felt like a sequel, but it didn't follow the beats of the original Alien because the whole tone was different. And I think that for me is like a gold star about what a sequel could do. And it's something I kept in mind with The Brightness Between Us.
Yeah, like the first movie was a horror film. The second movie was science fiction. And then it expands right there and from there. And I think that's tone is very important. I'm a huge fan of the trilogy, especially the second installment in a trilogy. Because typically in the second installment of a trilogy, there's not a happy ending, which is always interesting to me. And also, you're dropped right into the action, because we've got all the world building and all the character exposition and everything from the first film. So now we just jump you right in the middle of the action and we just story. That's usually like Empire Strikes Back, Matrix Reloaded. Like that's usually.
Oh, you're a Matrix Reloaded fan. That's also a controversial one.
That's my
a lot of purists that want to just roll
favorite.
Back to just the first movie. Oh, interesting. Like Two Towers, does that one work for you?
Two Towers, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Catching Fire.
Yep.
The Hunger Games follow-up. Yeah. I do like the feeling of not having to do the work of getting to know the characters, because that is a lot of work we writers ask of readers, is to spend the time putting the pieces together to figure out who someone is in the book. And sequels are great because you already know they're all friends by now, so you know exactly who everyone is.
But see, the other side of that, though, is then that puts so much pressure on the third installment because now you got to wrap this whole thing up in a satisfying way. And that doesn't happen as often as I'd like. Case in point, the third Matrix film.
Well, yeah. I mean, there are very few people are fighting for that one, unfortunately. But then, like Return of the King, that was an amazing act,
Right.
and that was the one that won the Academy Award for Lord of the Rings. Yeah, I think for me, the tricky one is the second one, as on the writer side of things, because often those are just treading water. Like the first book had the amazing beginning and set up the premise. The last one is going to finish everything, and the second one is like more stuff happens. You know, it's just like the middle stuff. And so I think it's hard to make those interesting on their own right.
But at least with your approach with these books, you don't have that pressure on yourself because you're not thinking of it in terms of a trilogy. You're thinking of like a satisfying story in this installment, and it is what it is for this moment. So that's good for you at least.
Yeah. I'm not sure how far this will go. It'll stop once I feel like we've told all the stories that needed to be told in this universe. But I'm not sure when that'll be. So I guess we'll just find it out as we go.
I mean, part of me doesn't know what to root for, but like, you might get to the point where when the film is a huge success and then they start backing the big money truck up to your house and now you're like, okay,
part more. This sounds
97.
Right. Well, part of it is, you see what happened with something like Game of Thrones, where the TV series got out ahead of the books. And so it was, it seemed like there was infinite amounts of material for them to adapt. And then all of a sudden the schedule was getting ahead of George R.R. Martin's. So part of it, writing the sequels does mean that I would be able to set the terms of where this storyline would go. Whereas if the movie did take off, like knock on wood, they would, if I weren't writing the follow-ups, they would be hiring a screenwriter to write it. So if I want to tell a story, I better get in there and get working.
Exactly, because I've seen too many examples of properties where they want the money, they want the capital T, they want the cash cow of the next part of the story, and the original screenwriter or the original writer isn't involved, usually because they don't freaking want to. Yeah. This is not what I want to do with my work, and it's not good.
Yeah. One TV series you see often the showrunner, who's kind of the head writer, is there for a season or two and then moves on to other projects, and the series takes a nosedive once their voice is out of the room.
Yep. Like right now, there's all this conversation. Mostly on the internet in discussion groups, but like, do you remember Lovecraft Country?
No.
That was on HBO. Lovecraft Country was a novel which essentially was like a bunch of short stories stitched together with one overarching plot line. And they made this brilliant series on HBO. And like the show had its own, had an accompanying syllabus because there was so many references with books and poetry, and it was just stunningly perfect. And when the series ended, there was just the one season, and people are like, we want season 2. But my whole thing is there was only one book. They did the series on the book. So if they do a season 2, now they have to start making up new shit without the author. I don't want to see that.
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe they'll come up with something that's out Lovecraft, but it's hard to imagine.
Yeah.
I guess they didn't, right? Yeah.
It's like you don't know what to root for. It's like, I'm not done loving this show, but no, I don't want you to mess it up.
Yeah. At the same time, though, I think, I'm really interested in not being too heavy in the room when they adapt, if they adapt get to the point where we're getting ready to make the movie, because I think I've said my piece for 400 pages. I've said everything I want to say about the characters and the storyline, and I'm kind of interested in someone else's take and what they want to modify and what they would do. And I don't want to get in the way of that. I'm afraid that, as the writer, I would say, like, no, we shouldn't be wearing a yellow shirt. It should be a green shirt. And like, just become insufferable to them. So I would much rather have a lighter hand help where I can, and then someday sit in a movie theater and the lights go down and I get to just see what they did with something that was once just a Word doc on my computer.
I love it. Yeah. And that's interesting when, like, when an author lets go of the reins and it ends up being different than their vision, and they're experiencing it for the first time with the rest of us. Like, what must that feel like? Like, do you recognize your baby at all?
Yeah, right. Hopefully you do. But then if they make a muck of it and it's a terrible movie, at least I can just say, like, I didn't do it.
Right.
They did it, But there's ways in which, movies are different, because I can get a lot of tension and story out in the internal narration in a novel, and a movie can't really do that. So They have to sort of prove through the visual medium what characters are about and what they're thinking. And that's a very different art form than what, as a novelist, I have access to. So I think I'll leave it to the experts to figure out how to translate what at times can be a more internal story in the novel into something that works well for cinema.
Do you like, right now I know the answer because you're in the middle of getting your work into a film, but do you like film adaptations better than series adaptations? Like, what do you think about those two?
Yeah, I don't know. I think there's so many films that I've loved and TV series that I've loved. It's hard to know. I think it keeps changing so much, which are getting the best productions and the best directors. Like, it's used to be that, like, film was considered a cut above, but those days are long gone, and you have some of the best digital entertainment is on TV now.
Right.
So I think I can see a version of, like, where a whole season would be the darkness outside us and a whole season would be the brightness between us. But I think with a movie, you have, like, this total clarity. Like, we know exactly where it's going to end because the screenplay's already gotten there, and it's just a really neat arc. Whereas a TV series ends up a little more open-ended, and I think has more room to play, but can be a little less tight than a movie can be. So I'm certainly open to both, but right now we're thinking of it as a movie.
Right. Like, there is that, like, it can become a big sprawling thing if you let it go over the course of a season. But at the same time, it can be, like you said, like, you can delve more into the internal struggles and the personal journeys of the individual characters. Like, the example that's in my head, total random comparison, is Dear White People. Like, there was the movie, and it told the story, beginning, middle, end. But then they redid it for the series. And that was interesting in that each episode was told from the point of view of a different character. So they still, over the course of the series, of the first season anyway, told the exact same story that the movie did. But you got so much more out of it because you got to see it from this complete 360 point of view, because you're seeing it from all of the different characters. And that's one of the things I love about expanding properties into series, that you can go as deep as you want, but then it really depends upon how seriously you take the work, because it can easily go astray. Like American Gods, for instance. Oh my God, the minutia that they paid attention to, and because I was so excited to see American Gods turned into a series, because I love that book. I have never been so bored by a story that I loved. It's like, we're 5 episodes in and we're only like 20 pages into this book. I don't understand. So yeah, there is a two sides to that coin. So who would you say are your biggest literary influences?
Um, well, for these books, I think Arthur C. Clarke is a big one. I I do love, like, storytelling wise. I think Suzanne Collins did an absolutely amazing job in the Hunger Games trilogy, and I think as a model of getting a tense thriller kind of story with a high concept world, like she really mastered the way to do it. My favorite book of all time is a book called Howard's End by Ian Forster, which is set in 1908 London, but Forster was a gay man. It wasn't revealed until he died in 1970, and he had this gay novel Morris that was only published then. But Howard's End, was this like straight characters, but written by a gay man with a gay sensibility. And as a gay teenager, I saw the movie and then read the book and felt like kind of seen by it, and that I understood him, and I felt a kindred spirit in Ian Forster. And so that book has always held a really close place in my heart, and I reread it pretty regularly. It's like my comfort read. It's a really great book.
You seem to like period pieces.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I like learning about somewhere else in general. I like to feel like I've gone far away from where I am.
It's like you're influenced by stories set in a fixed point in the past, and then you write about things that take place far into the future. It's interesting.
Yeah. Either sort of like having a good exploration, or I'm running from something in the present. Who knows? We'll have to we'll explore. Yeah. Episode 2.
Here's a question: do you have a soundtrack when you write, or do you write in complete silence?
No, I usually have music going. Yeah, I tend to write to sort of vapid pop. That's like a good match for me because it's got energy, but the lyrics don't require too much attention, and so I definitely wrote a whole album to, Kelly Clarkson, another one to, I don't know.
Interesting.
I never wrote to Katy Perry, but I do like an album that I know and love that I can just put in the background and feel the energies, but it's not like new music that I'm actively processing. Like, that's the perfect writing music for me.
Okay. All right. I love that. I love it. So what is your hope for your career? Like, say, where do you see yourself pie in the sky in 5 years? The movie's been out. It's a huge success.
I like this future. Sounds great.
Like, what's on your dream board?
Well, I'm toying around with the idea of a novel for an adult novel, not erotica, just a novel that's been destined
right.
Our audience as adults. But I was asked on a panel, what's a time period that you'd be interested in writing about that you've never written about? And I realized I'd always thought about, like, what would I have done if I were born in the Middle Ages as a gay man? Like, what would I have done with myself when there is no Stonewall? There's no gay awakening. And I realized I would probably have become a monk. I don't believe in God, but the idea of living on in some monastery with a bunch of other guys and brewing beer and illuminating manuscripts and doing astronomy and stuff, and singing chants, and it sounds great. So I'm imagining a novel about a monastery in the 12th century where it turns out not one or two, but all the monks are gay. It's like a gay monastery. So I'm not sure where to go with it story-wise, but I think that's probably the next project for me down the pike.
The most fabulous monastery ever.
That's right. That's a good title. I mean, you'd want to crack it open, right? The most fabulous monastery ever.
I mean, hey. Well, Eliot Schrefer, thank you so much for sitting and chatting with me. I'm so glad that I got to talk to you about your wonderful work, and I look forward to being able to sit in the theater and watch the film based on your work, because you've got a unique point of view that I think people need to check out, need to be exposed to.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I would love that experience too. So maybe we'll be communing across from 2 different cinemas thinking about that. But this has really been a great conversation, Charles, and I really appreciate your having me on, and I've really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you. What's your favorite way to get people to buy the book?
I love, it should be in most independent bookstores, your local small bookshop. So please check it out there. If you do want to buy it, I've signed the copies in 3 different bookstores: Books of Wonder, Red Balloon Bookshop, and Blue Willow Bookshop. So you can order it from any of those, and they'll send you a signed copy. Or you can get it from your general chain store too. That's all fine.
Fabulous. So the book is The Brightness Between Us by Eliot Schrefer, and I implore everyone that is within the sound of our voice to get yourself a copy and immerse yourself in this wonderful world that he has created. Eliot Schrefer, thank you so much, and I hope that this is not the last time we talk to each other.
Yeah, that sounds great. Let's do it again.
Yes. Take care now.
Thanks.
Full Circle is a Never Scared Productions podcast, hosted by Charles Tyson Jr. and Martha Madrigal, produced and edited by Never Scared, executive produced by Charles Tyson Jr. and Martha Madrigal. Our theme and music is by the Jingleberries. All names, pictures, music, audio, and video clips are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of their respective copyright holders.